A new home should mean a fresh start, but some places were never meant to be lived in. Some houses welcome you in, but never let you leave. I've noticed the channel losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways to support me. It's quick, free, and ensures you keep getting awesome content. Your support means everything. Thank you so much. I don't know how to explain what happened to me that day. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd been doing it for years, always preferring to go alone. There was something about being out there with just the sound of my boots crunching against the dirt, the wind rustling through the trees, and the vast, empty landscape stretching out in front of me. It was peaceful. It was grounding. And it was supposed to be safe. That morning, I left early, my backpack filled with just the essentials: water, a flashlight, a pocket knife, some protein bars. It wasn't a difficult trail, and I figured I'd be back before sundown. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. Why would I? I wish I had. The trail was quiet, almost eerily so. Normally, you'd hear birds, the occasional distant howl of a coyote, maybe the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. But that day, there was nothing. Just the sound of my footsteps, rhythmic and steady. I should have turned back the moment I noticed the fog. It started as a thin mist, nothing out of the ordinary. The Texas heat can make weird things happen, especially in the hills. But then, it thickened unnaturally fast. 1 second, I could see the trail winding ahead of me, the dry, rocky terrain bathed in golden light as the sun started its slow descent. The next, I was surrounded by a dense, swirling gray. It wasn't like normal fog. Normal fog drifts in slowly, rolling over the land, softening the edges of the world. This fog felt like it was alive. It wrapped around me too quickly, clinging to my clothes, muffling every sound. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It's just weather, I told myself. Texas is unpredictable. Then I checked my phone. No signal. That didn't make sense. The service had been spotty before, but I'd never completely lost it out here. I stared at the screen, a gnawing unease settling deep in my stomach. I kept walking, trying to remember the last trail marker I had passed. The air felt different now. Heavy. Too still. It was the kind of silence that made your skin prickle, like the world was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A rustling sound. Faint at first, barely noticeable over the sound of my own breathing. I stopped. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It wasn't the wind. The fog was too thick to see anything, but the sound was close. Something was moving through the brush just off the trail. I swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. Then, to my left, another rustle. To my right, a twig snapped. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The fog swirled around me, shifting like it was alive, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Then, through the haze, I saw them. Eyes. 2 glowing eyes staring at me from the mist. I froze. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a coyote. But the longer I stared, the more I realized they weren't normal. They were too bright, too steady. Unblinking. Then, more appeared. 1 pair. Then 2. Then 6. They were surrounding me. My breath hitched. My muscles locked up, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when I couldn't see what I was running from. The rustling grew louder. Closer. The fog shifted, and for just a split second, I thought I saw something move, a dark shape, impossibly tall, just at the edge of my vision. Then I heard it. A low growl. Not from one direction. From all around me. That was it. I turned and ran. I didn't care where I was going, didn't care if I was still on the trail. My feet pounded against the dirt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog was so thick I couldn't see where I was stepping, rocks, roots, uneven ground, none of it mattered. All that mattered was getting away. The growls grew louder, more urgent. I could hear footsteps behind me. Fast. Too fast. They were chasing me. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs. I tripped, caught myself, kept going. The fog seemed to move with me, refusing to clear, refusing to let me see where I was headed. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it lifted. The air cleared, the golden light of the setting sun breaking through. I stumbled into a clearing, nearly collapsing onto the dry, cracked earth. My chest heaved, my body screaming in protest. Silence. I turned, expecting to see them emerging from the fog, stepping into the clearing. But there was nothing. No eyes. No figures. No sound. Just the fading mist, curling at the edges of the trees, as if reluctant to let me go. I stayed there for a long time, my body still trembling, my mind trying to process what had just happened. I knew, I had seen something. And I knew it had seen me. By the time I made it back to my car, the sun had almost disappeared beyond the horizon. The parking lot was empty, the world completely normal again. But I didn't feel normal. I felt like I had barely escaped something I was never meant to see. I never went back to that trail. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about it. About the fog. About the eyes. And about the feeling that, somewhere out there, in the deep Texas hills, they're still watching. Waiting. I always thought the woods were peaceful. That was why I went camping alone. No people, no distractions, just me, the trees, and the open night sky. It was my escape from everything, my way of resetting when life felt too loud. But that last trip, I haven't been back since. It was late spring, the perfect weather for an overnight trip. I picked a remote trail I knew well, 5 miles into the Texas wilderness, far from any designated campsites. It was the kind of place where no one would bother you. I got there in the late afternoon, set up my tent in a small clearing, and built a fire as the sun dipped below the trees. The air was warm but carried the cool bite of the coming night. I had my camp chair, a good book, and a couple of beers. It was perfect. Until it wasn't. Around midnight, the wind picked up. Nothing strange, just the usual nighttime breeze stirring the trees. I leaned back, listening to the familiar sounds of the forest. The distant hoot of an owl, the chirp of crickets, the crackling of my fire. Then, everything went silent. The wind died. The crickets stopped. Even the trees stood still. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears. I don't know how to explain it, but the air felt wrong. Like the world was waiting for something. Then, the smell hit me. It wasn't anything obvious, not like rotting meat or skunk spray. It was musty. Sour. Like damp earth and something else I couldn't place. It seeped into my nostrils, making my stomach twist. I sat up, suddenly alert. I told myself it was just the forest. The woods had smells. It was probably just a dead animal nearby, or some stagnant water. Then came the footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Heavy. Not from an animal. From a person. Coming toward my tent. I grabbed my flashlight, heart pounding as I clicked it on and aimed it at the trees. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I scanned the woods, the beam cutting through the darkness. The smell was still there, clinging to the air. But the trees were empty. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe a deer had wandered too close. Maybe I was just on edge because of the silence. So I crawled into my tent, zipped it up, and tried to sleep. I woke up an hour later. Something had pulled my tent open. Not all the way, just a few inches. But enough. Enough for someone, or something, to look inside. I shot up, grabbing my flashlight again. My breath was shaky as I unzipped the tent the rest of the way and shined the light outside. The fire was almost dead, just smoldering embers now. And in the dim glow, I saw it. A figure. Tall. Too tall. Standing just beyond the light. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture hunched like it didn't belong in its own skin. It didn't move. Just stood there, watching me. I couldn't see its face. The fire was too low, the shadows swallowing everything above its shoulders. But I felt its eyes. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. Who's there? Silence. The figure tilted its head. Then, in a single, smooth motion, it took a step forward. I scrambled back into my tent, zipping it up without thinking. As if that thin layer of fabric would protect me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. The air outside was thick, suffocating. Then, the tent shook. Something slammed against it from the outside. Hard. I choked back a scream. My whole body tensed. The fabric bulged inward as a hand pressed against it. Fingers. Long fingers. Tracing along the material, like it was searching for the zipper. I clutched my knife, my breaths coming in short gasps. My mind screamed, run, run, run. Then. It breathed. I heard it. Low. Deep. Right against the tent. I don't remember making the decision to move. I just bolted. I didn't unzip the tent, I slashed it open with my knife and threw myself out into the night. My legs burned as I ran, blindly, through the woods. Branches tore at my skin, rocks dug into my feet, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the footsteps followed. Steady. Pacing me. Not running. Walking. Like it knew I couldn't escape. My lungs were on fire. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I had to get away. Then, up ahead, I saw it. The trail. My truck. I poured everything into one final sprint, throwing myself toward salvation. My fingers fumbled for the door handle, yanking it open. I climbed inside, slammed the door, and locked it. The woods were silent. I sat there, gasping, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Then. The smell. It was inside the truck. My stomach dropped. I turned, slowly. And saw the handprint on the window. Smudged, oily. Too big. I didn't look any longer. I started the engine and peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, the streetlights washing away the darkness. The next morning, I went back with the police. I told them someone had attacked my campsite. That I had barely escaped. We hiked out there together, but when we reached the clearing, everything was gone. My tent. My gear. Even the fire pit. Like I had never been there at all. The officers looked at me like I was crazy. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, I still smell that rotting, musty air. And when I look out my window, into the tree line beyond my backyard, I swear to God, I see something watching. I don't scare easily. I grew up hunting and hiking, spending most of my time in the woods. I knew how to navigate trails, how to track animals, and, most importantly, how to tell when something was wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. It was early fall, the Texas heat just starting to give way to cooler temperatures. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and I had a whole day to myself. I picked a remote trail, one I'd hiked a couple of times before, far from any major roads or campsites. I was about 2 hours in when I noticed the silence. Normally, even in the stillest moments, you can hear something. Birds, the wind, distant rustling in the brush. But this. Nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I stopped, listening. The back of my neck prickled. Then, up ahead on the trail, 2 men. They were standing side by side, dressed in identical park ranger uniforms. I hadn't heard them approach, which was strange enough, but something about them was off. They didn't look like rangers. Oh, they had the uniforms, the green and tan, the hats, the boots. But the badges, something was wrong with them. They were too smooth. Too blank. Just featureless silver plates where their names should have been. One of them nodded at me. "Hey there," he said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You'll want to turn back. There's been an incident up ahead." I stopped walking. An incident. I glanced behind them, scanning the trail. I couldn't see anything unusual, no fallen trees, no smoke, no signs of a search team. What kind of incident? I asked. The two men exchanged a quick look. The second ranger, the one who hadn't spoken yet, cleared his throat. "Nothing to worry about," he said. "Just follow us. We'll show you the safest way out." I frowned. The way he said it, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Something in my gut twisted. I knew what real park rangers were like. I had met plenty of them before. They were usually chatty, friendly, always eager to help. But these two? Too stiff. Too formal. Too wrong. They turned, motioning for me to follow. And I almost did. Almost. Then I noticed something else. Their boots. They were clean. Brand new. No dirt, no scuffs, no signs that they had been walking the same rugged trail I had been on for hours. And the stitching on their uniforms, perfect. No frayed edges, no fading, no wear and tear. Like the uniforms had never been worn before. Like they weren't real. A deep, icy fear crawled up my spine. I took a step back. "You know what?" I said, forcing a smile. "I think I'll just head back the way I came." The first ranger's expression didn't change. "That's not a good idea." The second one took a step toward me. "We can show you the way," he said again. His voice was different now. Lower. Too smooth. Too empty. My pulse spiked. I took another step back, my breath coming faster. Then the first ranger grabbed my arm. His grip was wrong. Too strong. Too cold. I jerked back, breaking free. "Let go of me." Neither of them moved. Neither of them even blinked. I turned and ran. I don't know what made me bolt like that, pure instinct, maybe. Some deep, primal part of me that knew I had just encountered something I wasn't supposed to. The trees blurred past me as I sprinted back down the trail, my boots slamming against the dirt. My breath came in ragged gasps, my chest burning. But I didn't stop. And neither did they. I could hear them behind me. Not running. Walking. Steady. Measured. Like they knew I couldn't outrun them. I risked a glance back, and my stomach dropped. They were closer. They hadn't run. They had just gotten closer. I pushed harder, my legs screaming in protest. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe they were just playing some sick joke. Maybe they were real rangers messing with me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I didn't stop running until I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car. Salvation. I bolted toward it, fumbling for my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and locked it. Then, slowly, I looked up. They were standing at the edge of the tree line. Just standing there. Watching. They hadn't broken a sweat. Hadn't stumbled. Hadn't even breathed heavy. And then, they turned. At the exact same time. And walked back into the woods. I didn't stay to watch where they went. I peeled out of the lot so fast my tires kicked up gravel, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by people. When I finally calmed down, I told myself I had overreacted. That I had let paranoia get the best of me. That maybe they were real rangers, and I had just panicked for no reason. So I went to the ranger station. I walked up to the desk, still shaken, and asked about them. The guy behind the counter gave me a strange look. "There weren't any rangers out on that trail today," he said. I felt my stomach drop. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Positive." I described them, their uniforms, their blank badges, their cold hands. His expression darkened. "Are you okay?" he asked carefully. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked out. I haven't been back to that trail since. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm walking alone, I get this feeling. Like someone is watching me. And every time I turn to look, there's no one there. But I swear to God, I can still hear their footsteps. I've always loved solo camping. There's something about being alone in the wilderness, away from the constant noise of everyday life, that makes me feel grounded. No emails, no traffic, no distractions, just me, the trees, and the quiet. That was the reason I found myself deep in the Texas woods that night. I had picked a secluded trail far from any campsites or roads, a place where I could be alone. I had hiked for miles that day, the sun beating down on my back, the weight of my pack pressing into my shoulders. By the time I found the perfect clearing near a small stream, the light had started to fade. It was beautiful. The trees formed a protective canopy overhead, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. The water trickled over smooth stones, a peaceful sound that blended with the distant chirping of crickets. It felt safe. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and sat down to enjoy the stillness. But the thing about stillness, it can turn unsettling real fast. It started with a sound. A cough. It was faint, almost too soft to notice, but it was there. Somewhere out in the darkness. I froze, my marshmallow still skewered on the stick over the fire. My ears strained to pick up anything else, footsteps, rustling, anything, but there was nothing. Just the whisper of the wind through the trees. I told myself it was probably just my imagination. The woods were full of sounds, especially at night. Maybe it had been an animal. But then I heard it again. Closer. I sat up straight, my body suddenly alert. My mind scrambled for an explanation. A fellow hiker. A lost camper. Someone who needed help. But I hadn't seen a single person all day. Hello. I called out, my voice carrying into the trees. Silence. The fire crackled. The water in the stream gurgled softly. And then, a sniffle. Like someone trying to breathe quietly, just out of sight. My skin crawled. That wasn't an animal. That was human. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, gripping it so tight my knuckles turned white. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked it on, sweeping the beam across the trees. Nothing. Just the skeletal shapes of tree trunks stretching into the night. But the feeling didn't go away. The heavy weight of being watched. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my ears straining for any sign of movement. Then, just as I started to convince myself I was overreacting, I heard it. A footstep. Not an animal scurrying. Not the rustling of leaves in the wind. A single, deliberate footstep. Right behind me. My breath hitched in my throat. I turned slowly, the firelight casting long shadows around me. The tent was behind me. The forest beyond that. And in the darkness, just beyond the glow of my fire, a figure stood motionless. My heart stopped. It was tall, too tall, its outline obscured by the trees. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark shape, watching. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat had gone dry. The figure didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just stood there. Then, the cough. Louder this time. Right in front of me. I whipped the flashlight around, but there was nothing. No one. I turned back to where the figure had been. Gone. I scrambled to my feet, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was not alone. I shoved my hand into my pocket, fumbling for the knife I always carried. My fingers wrapped around the handle just as I felt something brush against my shoulder. I spun, slashing wildly into the empty air. Nothing. But I felt it. A breath, cold and damp, against my skin. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I didn't stop to grab my gear. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the trees, branches whipping at my arms and legs, roots catching at my feet. The sound of my own breathing was deafening. But behind me, I heard it. Footsteps. Fast. Too fast. I pushed myself harder, lungs burning, vision blurring. The firelight disappeared behind me, swallowed by the trees. The darkness closed in, thick and suffocating. The cough came again, right beside me. I swerved, nearly losing my footing, my mind screaming at me to wake up, wake up, wake up. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I saw the trailhead ahead, the faint glow of moonlight breaking through the trees. If I could just make it. A hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed, my body jerking forward, breaking free. The grip was ice cold, not human. I ran harder, throwing myself toward the open path. And then, silence. I stumbled to a stop, chest heaving. I was at the edge of the trailhead. The trees behind me stood dark and still, nothing moving, nothing chasing me. My body trembled, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I turned back one last time. And saw him. A shadow, standing just at the edge of the trees. Watching. I didn't wait. I bolted for my car, not stopping until I was behind the wheel, the doors locked, the engine roaring to life. I never went back for my gear. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been a trick of the firelight. But then I looked at my wrist. Where the hand had grabbed me, bruises. Dark, finger-shaped bruises. And when I tried to sleep that night, I heard it. That same cough. Right outside my window. Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing.